everyone. Welcome back to dinanddaf. I'm Elana Stein Hain, and this is where we conceptualize halakha on the basis of a case study from the daf that week. So this week we are privileged to start a new parak in Bava Kama, the 10th parak, Hagozel Umachil. And the very first sugya in Hagozel Umachil talks about yaush. Now, yaush is something that has incredible emotional resonance right now. It means despair. And I would say that a lot of us are feeling despair or close to despair. And one of the things that I hope is that in the merit of learning about yaush in a financial sense, which within halakha, we will gain some resilience in a spiritual sense, be'ezrat Hashem, and we will see better and brighter days. And here, B'serot Tovot. So our opening sugya in the 10th parak on Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Bet is talking about the following scenario. I am somebody who had something stolen from me. And maybe it was stolen in a place that is such a busy thoroughfare and the object is so nondescript that I just never expect to get it back. Or maybe it's just been out of my hands for so long, I just don't really expect for it to return. So I experience an actual halakhic status called yaush, of I despair from getting it back. And the question is, in halakha, what is the impact of yaush on my relationship as the owner with the object? And the reason why I think this is an interesting question is because it speaks to our relationship with our possessions as being not just about whether something is on my property, not just whether something is legally in my portfolio, but also what is my psychological, mental, emotional attachment to it? Do I still think of it as mine? Do I still think of it as something that I'm going to see, something that I'm going to get? And that's really the question of yaush. And I would say the idea that my ownership might become attenuated over an object that was stolen from me because I have yaush is actually a pretty bold idea, right? You know, the idea of yaush actually comes from Aveda. It comes from the world of lost objects. And God willing, when we're learning Bava Metzia, we'll get to learn about Aveda and yaush in that context. But in that context, I understand it a little bit better, meaning I lost something. I don't think I'm ever getting it back. Somebody who picks it up, they don't have to come find me and give it back to me. I've already kind of made my peace with it. Now, there's also something called yaush midat, but we're not going to deal with that right now. God willing, we'll get to it, right? But in a case of gezel, in a case where somebody stole from me, should the fact that I despair from getting it back relinquish any of my rights to it, any of my ownership to it? It's kind of a big question. And I think today what we're going to see is that there is a machlok, there is a possibility that there are those who think, yes, that it actually does in some way relinquish your rights to the object to the extent that the gazlanit or the gazlan, when they're paying back, they don't have to actually return the object. Even though the Torah says, they have to return the actual gzela, asher gazal, that they stole, right? And yet, if we say that yaush gives them some ownership over it, they only have to return money. They don't have to return the original object. That's not how we paskin, but it is interesting to see it theoretically, see it held actually by some in the Gemara, and we're going to see it in a minute. But even if we say that yaush does not effectuate my loss of the object in a serious way, or really more the kinyan of the object by the person who stole it, again, so that they'd have to pay me money back and not the object itself. They never have a kinyan on it, so they never have to pay me anything. That would be way too far, right? But even if yaush is not fully kona on its own, does it do anything? Does it change the nature of my relationship to the object at all? And that's something that we're going to see. So there's somewhat of a spectrum. So I'm going to start by taking us back to a Gemara that you learned earlier in your learning of Bava Kama on Samech Vav Amud Aleph, which actually starts by taking for granted that yaush is kona, that yaush, even in a case of gzela, can actually give someone ownership over an object, right? But it doesn't end that way, but that is the way that it starts. So let's take a look. Oh, this is way too small. I can't do this. It's too small. All right, we're going to do what we can here. Yeush, right? Despairing from getting an object back. Amri Rabbana Dinikne, the rabbis think that it is koneh, meaning it does effectuate a kinyan for the gazlanit or for the gazlan, to the effect that they do not have to give you the object back. They can just give you the monetary equivalent. Mihu lo yadinan idoraita idorabanan, but we do not know whether it effectuates this kinyan on a biblical level or on a rabbinic level. What do we mean? Idoraita, if it effectuates a kinyan on a biblical level, miti dehava motze aveda. It means it's following the same pattern as the way we use yeush when it comes to lost property. Namely, motze aveda, when somebody finds an aveda, somebody finds a lost object, lav keva de biyayish maramina mekame tetetiliade kanile. Isn't it the case that when somebody finds a lost object, if the owner of that object has had yeush from hoping to get it back, right, before the finder gets it, don't we say that the finder, finders keepers in that kind of thing, right? If I find a dollar bill that has no distinguishing marks in the middle of Penn Station, in the middle of, Navon Station in Yerushalayim, I'm not going to return it to anybody. It's mine, right? So that's an example where Yeush is clearly koneh, right? So therefore, maybe Hainami, maybe in the case of a Gazlan, also given the Biyayish Mara, once the original owner has Yeush from getting it back, Kanile, the Gazlan or the Gazlanit has acquired it, meaning they'll only have to pay back money and they won't have to give the object back. Oh, Makani, seems like that's a kinyan. That would mean that it effectuates kinyan deoraita. Odilma, or maybe lodamya laveda, maybe it should be compared to a case of lost property, because aveda hu dechi ataliyade behetera ataliyade. In case of an aveda, in case of a lost object, the finder didn't do anything wrong, right? It came to the finder's hand through complete hector, through complete permissible action. Aval high, but this case with a gezel situation, given to be isura taliyade, because it comes to their hand through isser, through stealing, then how could you say that it effectuates a kinyan deraita? Come on. But maybe it effectuates a kinyan derabanan, midirabananu. Rabbinically, it should effectuate a kinyan. Why? The amar rabbanan nikne, mipnei takanata shabim. The rabbis would say it should effectuate a kinyan. Why? For the purpose of getting people to be willing to do tshuva and admit that they stole things. Meaning, imagine the scenario. Somebody steals, they've had something for 5 years. The original owner has, never expects to get it back. And then somebody's willing to admit, I stole. We say, okay, now you have to give the object back. And they're like, but I've lived with this object for 5 years and I really want to keep it. Nobody's ever going to admit it if you're going to make them give the object back. But if you say to them, give the monetary equivalent and you can keep the object, that's something else. Maybe they will be willing to admit that they stole, right? So that's a second option. And then Rav Yosef gives a third option. Rav Yosef says, come on, don't be ridiculous. Rav Yosef Amar, Yeush eino koneh, afilu v'afilu midra. No, Yeush on its own does not effectuate kinyan. It does not give the Gazlan or the Gazlanit a kinyan on this object, even rabbinically. No way. And it seems like the Rambam paskins this way, and the Shulchan Aruch paskins this way, and for good reason. Come on, the Torah says, gazal. They have to return the object that they stole. We don't want to be giving kinyanim to Gazlanim just because the people experienced a sense that they're never going to get something back, right? However, we should note parenthetically that Yeush plus Shinui Reshut, for example, meaning Yeush plus, the thief giving the object to a third party, that actually does create a kinyan for that third party. And Yeush plus Shinui Hashem, meaning Yeush plus a situation where the object is no longer called by its original name, like let's say a calf turned into a cow over time, right? That does create a kinyan, right? So Yeush alone, this is a conversation about Yeush alone, but Yeush plus something else does actually create a kinyan, which is interesting to think about, and it will come into play later. But suffice it to say, the position of yeyush is not koneh on its own is a very reasonable position, and is a position that the Gemara continues to take if you continue in that sugya over there and debate back and forth. But let's assume that's the position. Yeush is not koneh. If that's the position, then why do you read the following at the beginning of the 10th parak in Bava Kama? Okay, Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Bet, which is a sugya that you saw this week. The Mishnah says, Hagozel umachil ad banav, someone who steals and feeds what they stole to their children. Okay? Vehiniach lifnehem, or leaves it as an inheritance. We are really bracketing that example. That is for a different time if we ever get to it, but not for today. But the first example, a parent who stole food and gave it to their child to eat or children to eat, pturin mi l'shalem. Those children do not have to pay the original balim. Those children who ate it are not considered thieves. Interesting. Then the Gemara says, okay, but if it was an object that had a lien on it, maybe that's something else. Not getting into it right now. But the Gemara is trying to figure out, why is it that this third party that ate is not considered a thief, right? This is theft, meaning the item was stolen. And so the Gemara starts like this. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, a different case. Gazal v'lo nityashu habalim. Let's say someone stole, right? Person A stole, and the balim, the original owners, have not had yeush. Okay. By the way, Mishnah said nothing about yeush. The Gemara is bringing in yeush, right? There's been no yeush. Uva acher v'achalo mimenu, and a third party, person B, came and ate the stolen item. Ratzami zegove, ratzami zegove. The balim can say, "Hey, person A, I want you to pay me back for the gzela," or they can go to person B. Both person B and person A are considered gazlanim, right? Now notice this is before yeush. No yeush has happened yet. So this owner, the balim, are still hoping to get their stuff back. Both person A who stole it and person B who ate it, gazlanim. My time, why? Kol kamat lo nityashu habalim, so long as the balim did not have yeush, that they think they're never going to get it back, birshute de marekai, it is considered as though the object is in its owner's possession, which means when you eat it without permission, even though you're eating it in a thief's house, you're a gazlan too, right? It's as though it's still sitting in the kitchen of the original owner. Now the Gemara says, wait. Are you sure if you're a third party and you eat, they can collect from you? Didn't the Mishnah say something else? Tanan, what about the Mishnah? Person A steals and feeds it to people B, their child. Or left it as inheritance, bracket please. Persons B don't have to pay. Rav Chisda just said person B does have to pay the person who ate it, or the balim can ask them to pay. Here you're saying persons B do not have to pay the people who just ate it. So you have to the Rav Chisda. It seems like you're undermining Rav Chisda. Halakhah Rav Chisda would say, no. Kitanya hahi la'achar yeush. The Mishnah is talking about a case of post yeush. So let's get this straight. If the owners, the balim, had yeush, and then the thief, person A, fed the food to person B, then of course person B is pater min l'shalem, because it's after yeush. But if it was before yeush, then it's as though person B, by eating, is stealing from the balim. Now this is interesting because I got to tell you, we don't actually think that Rav Chisda thinks yeush is koneh. And yet, it seems to be that yeush does make some sort of difference, right? If a third party eats a stolen food, after there's been yaush, that third party is not considered the ganav or the gazlan. Only person A is. So what exactly does yaush effectuate here? If it doesn't effectuate a full kinyan on the part of the gazlan, but it does seem to effectuate some sense that person B is no longer stealing from the baal, right? So that's what we want to think about today. We want to ask ourselves, even if yaush itself is not konen, even if yaush itself does not give the gazlan more of a hold on the object so that the gazlan only has to pay back money and doesn't have to give back the object itself. And yet, yaush still may do something to attenuate the owner's connection to the object to the extent that a third party who would eat the stolen object after yaush is not considered a gazlan, right? So it doesn't go as far as allowing the gazlan to be kona it and only have to pay money, but it does go as far as making someone who eats it as a third party not considered a gazlan. So there's something going on there. And we want to understand what that something is, right? Because really what we're looking at here is not an on-off switch of is yaush kona or not, but more of a spectrum. It's clearly not kona all the way, but it does do something. And let's see what that something is. Or let's see what the explanation of that something is. So the Or Sameach, living in the 19th century and early 20th, in his explanation where the Rambam brings down this halakha, that a third party who eats after yaush is not considered gazlanim, is trying to understand, like, why yaush is not konen. Why should yaush make a difference? We say that it's like either it's still in the reshut of the balim, and therefore everyone's a gazlan here. Person A is a gazlan, the person who ate it, person B is a gazlan, right? So he comes up with a really interesting suggestion. And I was very excited about the suggestion because it's actually references a Gemara that I'm like about to learn in Chulin in a few dafim. So I was like excited about that. So he says, "V'ulai ta'ama de la'achar yeush im achlo." Maybe the reason is that after yeush, if somebody eats it, meaning a third party, they don't have to pay, is because dahave kimamon she'in lo tovin. Maybe the object becomes like possessions that have no claimants, no one to claim them. Dehamazik putter, someone who damages possessions that have no one to claim them is exempt from pay. Ukemo she'amru gabe matnot kahuna, right? Like we say regarding the gifts that are given to Kohanim. So let's take a zoom out for a second. The Gemara in Chulin on Kuf Lamed Amud Bet talks about a case where some knave, has been stealing matnot kahuna and eating them for a long time, right? Now, obviously, we can't be talking about truma. We can't be talking about things that they're not allowed to eat. But they've been. The question is, well, can they be brought to court to compensate? Not really, because no Kohen can say, that's my matnot kahuna. The people who, or those are my matnot kahuna, those are my priestly gifts, because the people who gave them can say, actually, I wanted to give them to someone else, right? No single Kohen has a lock on any given matana for Kohan, because the owners get to choose who to give it to. So that those matnot kahuna become mamon she'en lahem tovin. It's money that has no particular claimant. There's no one who can claim this is mine, and therefore you can't force the gazlan to compensate. Kind of wild. And so the Or Sameach is trying to use this for our case of Yeush. He's saying, well, maybe once a person despairs of getting something back, they're clearly no longer a claimant, right? Because they're not claiming it anymore. And maybe that makes it like mammon that has no claimants. Here, not because necessarily, I mean, maybe it's because it's trying to say like no one owns it. It also might be trying to say because nobody is actively claiming it, right? So he says, Kain hacha, likewise here, levater yeush dehabalim, right? After the despair of the owners, kvar nityaesh v'nafik mireshut mare. It's maybe it has left the reshut of its owner, and it's like possessions that have no claimants, right? Again, it's not koneh, the gazlan's not koneh to the effect that they don't have to pay, they don't have to give the object back, but it has left the reshut of the owner to the extent that that third party who eats it is not considered a gazlan. So that's one way to look at it, right? It's sort of, it's the lack of claiming anymore is significant. Tosfot have a slightly different way of looking at it. And Tosfot say, actually, we think that the issue with Yeush is something different. Well, not that they're reacting to the Or Sameach, that would be impossible, timeline-wise. But umisvara mechalek Rav Chisda ben lifnei Yeush ben la'achar Yeush. Rav Chisda distinguishes between prior to Yeush and after Yeush. It's not that it's no longer at all in the reshut of the original owner, but it's less in the reshut of the original owner after Yeush than it was before Yeush. Why? In what sense? Shenekal latzeit mireshut balim b'shinei reshut or b'shinoi Hashem. Because now it's a little bit easier to actually fully remove it from the possession of the balim, because if you have Yeush already, and then you have Shinoi Reshut, meaning it's given to another person as a gift or sold to them, or you have Yeush and then you have Shinoi Hashem, the calf grew up to be a cow, then those two things together, Yeush plus Shinoi Reshut, or Yeush plus Shinoi Hashem, does actually make it a kinyan for the Gazlan. And the Gazlan doesn't have to give the object back. You just have to give money, right? So the point is, by having Yeush, it's true that it hasn't completely left the reshut of the owner, but it's gotten a little closer because all you need is one more step to effectuate a kinyan for the Gazlan, right? So it's kind of interesting. Tosfot do something a little different here, right? It's sort of like thinking about it as being in a process, right? Yeush starts a certain process, whereas for the Or Sameach, Yeush, does really make it leave the reshut of the balim, even if it's not fully in the reshut of the gazlan, right? But it's still not in the reshut of the balim, right? So it's kind of interesting. What you have on the bottom with the Rambam is actually an example where the Rambam does think that rabbinically, Yeush actually can be koneh certain things in certain moments, not the object itself, but a higher valuation. But you can look at it on your own time. Suffice it to say, what we have seen here is we have seen an example where, it's one thing to say that Yeush could be completely koneh, and you can let the Gazlan keep an object and just pay back money. That we are not willing to do in Gezel, la halakha. However, we do recognize that there's a certain attenuation that happens when a person does experience Yeush, that either, per Tosfot, makes it easier to eventually give the kinyan to the Gazlan by having also Shinoi Reshut, or by also having Shinoi Hashem, or it just makes this object, per the Or Sameach, something that nobody is being toveya or tovat, somebody that nobody is claiming, right? And I do think that despite the fact that we don't say that yeush is koneh on its own, recognizing that yeush does something, it does tell us something about the relationship between people and their stuff. Now, I would be remiss, I would be really remiss if I didn't connect this back to our situation today, because I can't look at this sugya of yeush without thinking about the hostages who are still held by Hamas. And I can't think about it because I recognize that this idea of mamon she'en lo tovin, possessions, or in this case, human beings who have nobody who are trying to claim them, they get lost. They become lost. And there's no one there's no one to claim them, and no one gives them back. And I really do hope that we continue to claim them, and that Bezrat Hashem, we see those claims actually come to fruition. In the meantime, I hope that you have a little bit of a window into Yeush when it comes to Gezel. And I hope that, God willing, we will learn about Yeush when it comes to Aveda when we get there in Bava Metzia. Thanks, everybody. Be well.